Hello, everybody. Welcome to Leadership Models, Generational Differences, and Cultural Differences. I will try not to cough through too much of this, and I'm sure you can hear from my voice that I'm losing my voice a little bit, so I will try to make this as brief as possible. Talking about sources of power, which will actually feed into the lecture that we have about power itself, but talking about legitimate power, reward, coercive power, expert, and referent power. These 5 types of power basically represent all the different ways that people can have and utilize their power. Legitimate, although an arguable word choice, refers to power that is supposedly God-given. And so, oh, I touched inside there. There we go. And so people used to think that kings and queens, that wasn't something that was elected. It had nothing to do with anything that was legal. It really just had to do with the royalty being a God-given power. And so that was a legitimate source of power. Reward, so we give power to people. We give them little gold stars and we say you can watch a little extra TV or you can do this or that. In nursing, it happens all the time. We say, to the patients, oh, if you just eat one more bite, then we'll go and we'll do this thing. Excuse me. Same thing happens with nursing. Oh, I really want you to work an extra 4 hours tonight. I will throw in, an extra day off for next week of different rewards to that. And some of the problems, pros and cons, is that yes, it gets the person to do what you want them to do right now. But what happens in the long run is that people then stop performing because they want to or because of loftier reasons, and they're really only performing because they get something. Same thing when you're trying to reward children. The power that you happen to have is that you can give them something, but then what happens when you don't have a thing to give them? You don't no longer have TV or ice cream or whatever the thing happens to be. Let's say you lose power. No TV, no ice cream. Now what? Now they're not behaving because they should be behaving, but because they didn't get something. Coercive power, so that makes sense of just you have to pass this class or you're going to kill people. I'm sure you have all heard that before, and as nursing students, I know I certainly did. And so the NCLEX is a part of that. You have to pass this class, or you're not going to graduate, and you're not going to pass your boards, and you're never going to get a job. So which is why we all cry through nursing school. But a part of that coercion, same thing as you're not getting people to learn in a positive way. You're not getting people to perform because, again, of loftier goals, because they want to do best practice. And what really happens is that people then have sort of a loathing of either the process or the system or the person that has that power over them. Again, sort of what happens then when you take the power of the grades away, well then do people want to go back to nursing school? Do they want to go back for a master's or for a PhD? And I can tell you, as somebody that has both a master's and a PhD, they are completely different than what it's like to go through nursing school. Nursing school is the hardest of all 3 levels that I've done. Next would be my PhD, and the least hard was my master's work, for sure. But you don't know that until you've gone there, and a lot of why people don't go on is partly because they're happy where they am, but also because they don't like this coercive power piece that maybe they experienced wherever they went before. Expert, so you walk into a patient's room and automatically you're given a power by the patient and their family member because you know things and you can give them things, and that's part of being the nurse. People entrust things with you because of what that title is, and that's expert power. A police officer comes over. You don't know anything about them, but they're wearing the uniform and they're wearing the badge, and so there's a certain amount of power that you assume that they have, and then therefore you give to them. A teacher would be another example, a parent. And then there's referent power, and that's referring to charm. I always use Bill Clinton as the example because, like him or hate him, people have to admit that he's a very charming person. And I don't mean charming in the male-female way, but more of the let's fly over to North Korea, hang out and party for the night, and fly home with the hostages that were being held there. Something that nobody else in the world has been able to do. After everyone else tried, they all called up Clinton and said, all right, go do your thing. And that's referent power. He's not president anymore. He can't make things happen in the way that a president could, or the leader of the UN could, or he doesn't have any control over whether they get goods. Sometimes they do that with trying to coerce a situation. So we'll move on to the next part. All right, so leadership styles. Yes, there are so many different types of styles, models, and methods. So how do you pick them? You have the articles, and for whoever's going to be doing the seminar for this week, I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot about different leadership styles. So how then do you pick all of the different things that there are? You have to go through the basics of what is your personal leadership personality. So we all have our regular personality, but then how do we behave in a group? When something goes wrong at work, how do you organize everybody? Do you like to take control and make sure everything gets done yourself? Do you like to itemize a list? Do you like to delegate out everything? Do you like to get super bossy, which is not in a bad way, but in a very good way of you're going to go take care of this and report back to me in 15 minutes? Those are all fine. They're all different styles of leadership, but what works for you? And so sort of going back to the sources of power, you might like to do the reward of this has been a really hard shift for everybody. Yay, I ordered us a pizza. Or you might like something that's totally different. And you have to really reflect on what is your goal? Is your goal to get through? Is your goal to have everyone feel happy at the end, which is a very hard goal? Is your goal to get the tasks all done? Is it to think of new things to prevent the problem from happening in the future? Which of those things are your goal, and what would you like to do? That will ultimately influence what type of leadership style you'll most find that fits. Okay, so creating and establishing and adapting following the rules. So are you personally a by the book person? Are you clear and consistent with what your rules are? So when you come on the floor, do you talk to the nurse's aide and say, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I'm not going to do, here are the patients that need extra whatever, I will come back in a half an hour and see how everything went, or 2 hours, or call me when you need this, or I will come back. So what kind of directions do you give when establishing those rules? Are the rules, like I said, black and white? And what happens when you work then in the gray areas? So what if you're flexible, but your team is not flexible in that same way? What if your team is by the book, but you're more flexible? So then who establishes the rules? Do the rules come from you? Some do. Sometimes they come from the patient. Sometimes they come from administration. Sometimes they come from our state laws. And who decides if they need to be changed? And this is really a big part of what this program is about, is a multicultural program. Sometimes the rules do just need to be changed. So we've been talking a lot in the presidential election about what to do with immigration policies. And a lot of people get very upset about people not following the immigration laws or not following laws in general. But that doesn't answer the question of, are they then good laws? Maybe people break the laws because they're bad laws, they're discriminatory laws, or they're problematic in some way. Maybe we just need to make different laws or better laws or laws that are more clear and consistent. And so then who decides that? How do we make that all happen? So we'll talk about the rest of that in the course of this class. So leadership theories, we're talking about the traits of a good leader. So normally if we were in class, I would ask us all to sort of write a list. And so I'd like you to take some time, stop the lecture and take a moment to think about in your own mind, what are traits of a good leader? What type of person have you liked to work for or under? What behaviors do they do? And that has to do with some of these rules on slide 4. The contingency piece is, how does the situation change the leadership? So you may have a regular day and leadership is great. They come around, they see everybody, and then all of a sudden you have 2 codes on the floor and the ER is calling you because they want to transfer a patient up to you, and Susie called out sick, and so now what? And where is your leadership? Sometimes leadership disappears when things get rocky. And other people are sort of not really around on the day-to-day, but when you need them, they are there. You can sort of see that a situation may change their style of leadership, and other times people are 100% consistent. They're there every time, every day. What is the source of the leader's power? So we had talked about that from earlier. These are different types of leadership when the personality of the person is the focus of their leadership style. So somebody that has a democratic style, the leader is ultimately in charge, but then motivates the group by getting their input and helping with the decision making. I would say in the hospital setting, most of us follow a leadership style like this. In an autocratic style, we're establishing clear goals and expectation on what needs to get done, and we have a clear division between the leader and the followers. And you might say that this is what happens more with our ancillary staff. We may tell the secretary, call this doctor and let me know when they've called back. That's very different from getting the input and helping with the decision making. And the last one is the laissez-faire. They offer little to no guidance and they allow the group to be really independent. So that may happen with a student, for example. Although we are offering guidance, but we may sort of just let everyone do their job. Your nurse manager may be this way, that until you come to them asking for help, even other nurses, we all sort of do our own job and we don't necessarily go and work as a part of a collective team unless something comes up. And of course the combination. So like I said, we may be this way in one situation and this way in a different situation. When the goal is the focus. So a visionary person is change-oriented or action-oriented. So like I said, perhaps we have rules, regulations, and policies that need to be changed. Maybe there's something that we need to do to make this situation much better, and that's the visionary person. Somebody that likes pace setting likes to keep control over the tone, and so if anyone's ever been in a code, you've been in ones that are very sloppy, ones where everyone's very panicked and it feels very frenetic. And other times people, no matter how crazy the situation gets, it remains very calm and subdued. I've worked in oncology for almost all of my career, and that pace setting has been true no matter what hospital I've worked at in oncology. I've also floated to the med-surg floors or telemetry or to post-surgical. I've floated all over the place. And on other floors, it can be loud, it can be pretty rough. You have people coming and going all the time, and then you go up to the oncology floor and it's just sort of la 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 la, and there is an incredible amount of acuity and emergency, lots of blood product, chemotherapy, lots of tests and procedures, people coming and going, but the pace tends to be very different. I've seen that as sort of a culture of that unit, that the leadership tends to do that. A coaching as the goal, so people who really like to focus on mentorship and guidance. And then, of course, that commanding military style. And that would, since we just last week talked about different stereotypes of nursing, we might think of that Nurse Ratched type of leader who comes in and says, here's how it's all going to be. I'm not going to read this to you. Certainly you have it and you can read it yourself. But this is a different type of another leadership model that you could use in as an example. There's care, communication, consciousness, context, contrast, change, and capability. And this is just a different way of looking at leadership from a cultural perspective, and it's just a very interesting model. Okay, I'm going to start by saying, only because my time on this is running a little bit short, I want to make sure that everyone hears this before we have to go to the second part, that these are both great videos. The first one, especially this one right here, talks about all the different generations, and it's a little bit long, but it's worth it. And especially when you find your own generational group, it's just really interesting. They show you music, clothes, toys, different TV shows, and things like that that help mark out each of the generations. This second video shows you some of generations in the workplace. And that's all I'm going to say about that for right now. We do have more generations than just this, but the greatest generation is the Depression era. Baby boomers, known as the me generation, I did not make that up, that's what they're known as. Mostly because the Depression era, when they came out of the Depression, the parents wanted to give their kids, these tiny little baby boomers, everything. And so as a cultural group, not that individual baby boomers are this way necessarily, but as a cultural group, it's all about me. And this is a part of why capitalism grew so much in the United States during this time. A lot of our environmental policies changed at this time of not thinking many generations ahead. Very different from sort of that Depression era personality. If you've ever taken care of a generation, of a person from that generation of the Depression era, those are the people that like to keep like 20 little sugar packets in their drawer in the hospital. They tend to hoard things. They don't throw stuff out. They like to get things fixed, or they're still wearing the same pair of shoes they've worn for 40 years. That's very different from what happened with the baby boomers, where we started to all of a sudden invent things that were disposable. And again, it started to really change. So I'm going to stop here and we'll go through the rest of these in the next section.